Welcome everybody to ordinary meeting of Hunters Hill Council 4510. I will ask you all to be upstanding. I'd like to show my respect and acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land, of elders past, present and emerging on which this meeting takes place. I will now invite Pastor Alex from the Life Congregational Church. Something that we've been doing to foster our relationship with local clergy is to invite one of the local clergy in to open our meetings with a prayer. So I'll pass over to Pastor Alex.
Okay. Heavenly Father, we thank you today for your goodness and mercy towards us. We live in a very affluent land, and sometimes we forget what is happening across the world. There are many people suffering various dangers and strifes. Nevertheless, Lord God, we still feel our own problems, our own challenges, our own hurts. Today, Lord, we remind you of your prayer, the Lord's Prayer, which says, "Give us today our daily bread and forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us." And following that, Jesus said, "For if you forgive other people when they sin against you, your heavenly Father will also forgive you." Lord, we want to walk in freedom from resentment, from bitterness, from hurt. We want to go forward, not encumbered. So we let go of any of these impediments and we free ourselves today by asking your forgiveness. Lord, I commit this time together between the public and all the members of this council. We're all doing their best to go forward and to progress, but also to be a good community-minded place. We commit this time together to you, Lord God, and thank you for loving us and giving us a future and a hope here on this earth. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Thank you, Pastor. You can all be seated. There are no apologies. Councillors Bagara and Prieston are joining us via Zoom link today. It's wonderful to see a full gallery once again. We haven't had this in probably 3 years now, so that's fantastic to see. Declarations of interest, councillors. Councillor Sanderson.
Yes, Mr. Mayor. Is there not a non-significant interest in item 4.6, the development of Portland Road, which is an immediate neighbour of mine in the proximity I will be came for that tonight.
4.6. I will declare a non-significant non-pecuniary interest in item 4.12, plans of management, but I don't deem it significant enough to leave the chair. Councillors, any other declarations of interest? If not, I'll move on to item 1, confirmation of minutes of ordinary meeting 4509 held 18th of July 2022. Councillor Quinn, seconded Councillor Williams. Any discussion? If not, I will put the motion. All those in favour? Against? That is unanimous. There is a little bit of a lag time, councillors Bagara and Prieston, so if you can shoot your hands up quite quickly, that will assist. I'll move on to mayoral minutes. There are 2 mayoral minutes, item 2.1, and I'll read these out. Mayoral minute 2.1, Levisone student visit. The sister city relationship between Hunters Hill Council and Levisone beginning in 1988 has allowed for a student exchange program between our two areas since 1991. One of the benefits of having a sister city relationship between Hunters Hill and Levisone is the student exchange program. With international travel possible again following restrictions during the COVID pandemic, we were able to once again host high school exchange students from Levisone in July and August of this year. The students came to Hunters Hill, arriving on Bastille Day as part of a 6-week trip. where they stayed with host families and enjoyed our beautiful area. Our sister city relationship is incredibly valuable for cultural enrichment of our high school students. It's a chance to share stories, experiences, and broaden their horizons as citizens in our own lands. It's an opportunity to practice diplomacy and learn how to navigate differences in a thoughtful way. It is a privilege to help facilitate this program again, and we acknowledge the work of the Hunters Hill Levesenay Friendship Committee in making this possible. That's the report. Councillors, do I have a seconder? Councillor Quinn. Any speakers?
Yes.
Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, for bringing this mayoral minute forward to council. It does mark a re-engagement in the program. It's been, what, 3 years now since the program of student exchange has been able to take place. And this recent exchange was a catch up on those students that weren't able to attend because of COVID in the reciprocal arrangements from 2019. As well as their visit, there was a farewell afternoon tea, which you hosted, Mr. Mayor, and thank you for that. At the same time, there was acknowledgement of Molly Ryan, who was the Australian division winner of the Levesenay International Song Competition. And that was designed to fill the gap between being able to have an exchange program and being able to keep the connections and keep activities going. I was lucky to be selected as a judge. I'm not quite sure how I was, but I was selected as a judge. And I had the honour of being in Levesenay for the Fête de Marguerite in June, and at the final presentation and the awards for that song competition. And I accepted the award on behalf of Molly. And at that afternoon tea, I was able to present that to her. So the exchange is now, or has always been, a very strong and lively activity. I think there's over 300 students been through the program. It also extends an opportunity for residents to actually, when they're in Europe, or particularly in Paris, to make contact with Levesenay. I recently referred some residents on, and they spent a day out there in Levesenay and were hosted by the committee. So if anybody is travelling to France, particularly Paris, take that opportunity to make contact with our twin. It's a twinning arrangement. So thank you, Mr. Mayor, for this mayoral minute.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other speakers? If not, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Against? That is unanimous. I move to item 2.2, mayoral minute, Robert Bob Mackenzie Moyston, and I'll read it out again. It's with much sadness we recognise the passing of Robert Bob Moyston. Born on 18 September 1929, Robert lived in Hunters Hill his entire life. He was a well-respected member of the community, and in both his professional and personal lives. Robert spent his time on the board of the Hunters Hill Club and as an active member of the Probus and the Historical Society, and as a supporter of the Hunters Hill Rugby Club. Friends and relatives knew Bob as an extremely warm-hearted, generous, proud of his family, committed to life in Hunters Hill, and with a very strong sense of service to his community. He passed away on 17 July, 2 months shy of turning 93. His funeral was held at the Camellia Chapel, Macquarie Park Cemetery and Crematorium on 22 July. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Quinn. Any speakers? Councillor Quinn?
Mr. Mayor, look, I would like to speak to this one. Bob Moyston has lived, as you mentioned, in Hunters Hill for his entire life. But not only things that have been pointed out there in the report, but he was also very significant contributor to this community financially as well. As many would know, we have wonderful heritage walks around Hunters Hill, and in the pavement on a couple of those, there's 2 heritage walks that have been marked out. The first tranche of those was funded by the Amati family, and the second tranche of those was funded by the Moyston family. So there's been a very significant contribution by Bob and his family to the Moyston Foundation to that particular part of keeping our heritage very much recognised in this community. I'm also aware that he was a very keen sailor throughout his life, and one of the stories which he would often recount as well, apart from sailing, was that he was the bloke that put out the fire at Woolwich Public School when he was a young lad or a teenager, when the school was still in operation. So he was the guy with the hose that managed to quell the fire before the fire brigade arrived. And I know he used to often tell that story to people. So we certainly will miss Bob as someone who has made an extraordinary contribution to this community.
Thank you, councillor. Any other speakers? If not, I'll put the motion. All those in favour?
Aye.
Against? That is unanimous. Now, councillors, we do have a number of speakers today. We have had applications for items that are not on the agenda. We don't always take those speakers on, but in the interest of giving, obviously, the public the opportunity to address a particular issue. Obviously, the proposed small dog park at Tarban Creek has had a number of applications to speak. We will allow speakers from the public on that matter. Before we do, I will just ask the General Manager, just so that there is an understanding of where council is in their processes. I'll ask the General Manager just to make comment about the application, where it's up to and where the public consultation process is, and what the plans are moving forward.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Good evening, councillors, and welcome to everyone this evening in the public gallery. In relation to the Tarban Creek Dog Park proposal, and I stress the word proposal, this, in a nutshell, the council was successful in receiving some grant money. It was put to the council originally as part of the application to, in fact, it was on the opposite side to the current plan that is now on public exhibition. We are going through a very extensive community consultation period that will run through until the 5th of September. And that consultation will be led by one of our senior officers, Eddie Goodman. All of the people who have already submitted online submissions or thoughts have been responded to and acknowledged the receipt of their submission to us. And we take that really important, that we want to communicate back to people. The framework for that community consultation is very clearly articulated on our council website, and that will run through until the 5th of September. After that, council will take its time and go through all the feedback, and ultimately come back to council with an extensive report reflective of that feedback from the community, and propose some recommendations for the consideration of our councillors. I do want to point out two other things. It has been said publicly that one of the considerations would be to apply and potentially move the dog park, and I do use that word again, potentially, to Riverglade Reserve. Now, under the funding submission, that's not possible. You can't just move something from one area to the other. That would have to go through a reapplication. I can also say that that reapplication would be a fruitless exercise, because the plan of management for Riverglade Reserve actually doesn't allow for a dog park. So we wouldn't go down that path. Apart from that, I also want to make it very clear that one of the options that may come back to council is that the feedback is so strong against the park that one of the potential recommendations is that we actually give the money back. That is another option for council. So, Mr. Mayor, that's essentially in a nutshell where we're at, and hand it back over to you to allow our valued feedback from our ratepayers.
Thank you, Mr. General Manager. Just clarifying with the Riverglade Reserve component that it's not a enclosed dog park is not allowed, not a dog park, because they have the off-leash area existing.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Mayor, can I ask,
Councillor Williams.
through you to the General Manager, is it possible for council to review and revise its plan of management to incorporate a dog park?
Look, potentially, yes. But my concern would be, Councillor Williams, that the time involved there from the time frame of when we would have to complete the project, I would say that we would run out of time, in a nutshell. So even if we went down that path, we would have to ask for a further extension of the department to actually construct the dog park, but that again is possible.
That being said, I'll invite Mr. John O'Grady to come and speak. And each of the speakers, we do have a number of them tonight, so we're trying to keep as far as possible to the 3-minute speaking rule. So you'll hear a bell at 2 minutes and 30 seconds and another one at 3.
Thank you, Mayor, for allowing me to address council today. And thank you, councillors, for your consideration on this matter. I wish to raise some points when considering the location of the new fenced dog park. Why Tarban Creek is not a good location for the fenced dog park. It's a unique natural park unspoilt by any built infrastructure. It's currently an off-leash area valued highly by the community. On the Hunters Hill Council website seeking community feedback for a dog park in Tarban Creek, it states feedback received from our community during the development of Riverglade Reserve Plan of Management that identified the need for an enclosed off-leash dog area. Well, it's interesting, the Riverglade Reserve survey results clearly identified a need for a fenced dog exercise area in Riverglade Reserve, not located in Tarban Creek, which was outside of that management plan. And that's referred to on page 80 in the appendix, that the surveys clearly indicated that. A fenced dog park will get significantly more traffic as it will attract more people from potentially outside of council area. So the wear and tear on the grass will be significant, likely leading to turning it into mud, which can be dangerous given the steep gradient of the park. This wear on the ground cover will be exacerbated by the shaded area. Muddy dog park will lead to the park being closed frequently, likely, or additional costs of maintenance for relaying turf. Also with the steep gradient, it would be unsuitable, in my opinion, for some people with disability challenges due to the extent of the slope. On a more positive note, why should it be located in Riverglade Reserve? Feedback received from our community during the development of the Riverglade Reserve Management Plan identified the need for an enclosed off-leash dog area in Riverglade Reserve. Interestingly, I actually don't understand why, therefore, it's not in the plan, because it was extremely high up in the requirements of community. So have council actually listen to community on that plan? That's a question. Families will be able to enjoy recreation together with the kids playing at the playground and the dogs enjoying playing next door and the parents enjoying a coffee watching both. Shared services will be available across both playgrounds and the fenced dog areas such as toilets, parking facilities. Bin collection may be easier and cost less to maintain. The area is near flat and not on a steep gradient, so perfectly safe, so providing inclusivity for all. No overhanging trees to injure people from dropping branches. Better sunlight for grass growth, which will lessen the likelihood of injury from slipping on mud and reduce maintenance costs. I support a new dog enclosure in Riverglade Reserve as requested by the community, as it is the right thing to do for the community. I call on council to withdraw this poorly considered plan immediately and move to community consultation for a new fenced dog park to be installed at Riverglade Reserve next to the fabulous inclusive play space. Thank you for your consideration.
Thanks, John. John, if you could just... Questions? Of John? No? No, all good. Thanks, John. I'll now call, and I should have acknowledged before, Emeritus Mayor Mark Bennett. You have the call. Good to see you back.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, councillors, general manager and staff. Pleasure to be back in the room. Lovely to be here. Perhaps I could just start briefly by saying that Tarban Creek Reserve is actually Crown land. And it's, as I understand it, it's Crown land that's devolved to council and operates under the care and control of council. Unusually, and perhaps not unusually if I knew the full details, it doesn't have a plan of management. If it did have a plan of management, we might find ourselves in the same position we are with Riverglade Reserve, where we would be unable to put a fenced dog park in that reserve because the plan of management doesn't allow it. So because we don't have a plan of management, it seems to be open season on the park and we can do anything with it. We have concerns where it might end up if it continues on through consultation for the next few months, and we have concerns about what might be added in or amended. I'd like to say that grant money, when it's promised to the council, is certainly very appreciated. It allows council to do many things that wouldn't otherwise be done because they often seem to be non-essential. Once grants are approved, it raises the expectation of the community that council will actually proceed with those works in haste. However, at times, grant applications may not be in keeping with the residents' needs or their wants, and that's when the difficulty arises. In this particular instance, the community was not consulted prior to the grant application being made for Tarpon Creek Reserve. Previously, the survey was conducted in Riverglade Reserve. Riverglade Reserve is clearly the best location for this facility, and perhaps we have to wait a year for it to appear in that location. Last Saturday, 42 people got together in Riverglade, in Tarpon Creek Reserve, to say they do not want a small dog park in this area. There is little purpose in proceeding further as the community is not in support. Let's not waste more valuable Hunters Hill staff time on this matter. This is without any doubt the wrong location. I ask you to note that current proposed location within Tarpon Creek is not the location cited in the grant application.
We've got 30 more seconds, Mark.
Further, it's on a very dangerous corner. The issue on Glazeville Road is the main road that goes through the shopping centre. And if we mix cars and children and dogs together, I think we'll end up with a tragedy there. Further, the parking is very limited in that location. Our view is that there are much better locations to site this facility. Let's avoid months of unnecessary consultation. A small dog enclosure in this location would be a dangerous mistake. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll ask you to, Mark, I'll ask you to come back to the podium just in case there are questions from councillors. Councillors?
Forgotten already.
Sorry, yeah. Councillor Crassoy.
Thank you. Welcome back.
Thank you.
Are you suggesting that you asking council to stop the consultation process for this location now?
I ask you to consider stopping the process, because I think the staff have a lot of really important things to do. For a small council, the more time the staff get taken up with this, the less time they have to work on other things. I think in the end, sense will prevail here and see it as a very poor choice of locations. We canvassed whether residents would like it at the other end of Tarpon Creek, where it was originally proposed to go, cited in the grant application, and that didn't receive any support either. We took a straw poll at the end of the discussions on Saturday morning, who was in favour of it and who was against it. Everybody there was in favour of it not proceeding, and nobody was against it. Now, I might add, there were people there, a lot of people there with dogs who came from around the area. So it wasn't just people in Reserve Street. I should declare I live in Reserve Street, but it wasn't just people in Reserve Street. And they were very much against it and worried about it. A young girl said to us, a young girl who was about 12, does anybody know? 13. 13, thank you. Was your daughter? She spoke and she said, I think it would be very dangerous for me because I walk my dog in Riverglade Reserve and I would have to cross over the road on Manning Road to get here, and it would be dangerous for me. And I thought, well, it's not such a bad spot down there. But of course, children who are on the other side of Gladesville Road need to cross Gladesville Road to get there. And it's just a difficult location, I think. I think if you think about it, councillors, and if you're willing to bring it back as a motion to another meeting to consider it, I think there's enough reason not to proceed with it any further and waste staff time. I ask you to consider it.
Councillor Quinn.
Yeah, so sorry, just to clarify, so when you say not to proceed with it, you say not to proceed with it in Tarpon Creek Reserve?
Yeah, sure.
But I sense from that meeting on Saturday, people were saying, yeah, let's have it,
Yeah.
as the previous speaker said.
Sure. So, yeah, I don't think there was anybody there that didn't think a gated dog area was a good idea. I think they all thought it was a good idea. It's just the wrong location. That's also, we're not against the idea. It's a good idea. A facility in the area would be wonderful. We may be fortunate enough to get some money again to do it, but let's not put it in a dangerous location. Please.
Councillors, any other questions? If not, thank you.
Thank you.
I'll call Mr. Dan Tebbit. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, councillors. My name is Dan Tebbit, a relatively new resident in the area, living on Prince Edward Street in Gladesville, which is the other side of, runs along Tarbin Creek Reserve. Really a bit hard to add to what John and Mark said. Actually, they covered most of the key points from my perspective and really conveyed the sentiment from that meeting on Saturday. Thanks to Councillors Williams and Quinn, who came along to hear the community concerns on Saturday. We live on, as I said, on Prince Edward Street. We regularly use the Tarbin Creek Reserve. It's a wonderful location. We are dog owners. We have children. I think, like most people in the area, we're really concerned that the proposed development will spoil the beauty and amenity of this really unique reserve area. It's one of the big attractions for us when we bought there, is this beautiful undeveloped reserve site there. But at risk of repeating what's already been said, some of our concerns, that current location, and I have read a lot of the paperwork, that wasn't the originally proposed location. I think it's entirely inappropriate. Gladesville Road, as people know, is a very busy road. There are no crossings marked anywhere there on Gladesville Road. I think it is really dangerous. There's no parking on Gladesville Road or on Reserve Street. As John said, it's very steep. I know from first-hand experience, it's often waterlogged and muddy as it currently is. I think with more traffic on there, that would get worse. But also it is a really uniquely beautiful site as well. The northern side of Tarbin Creek Reserve is already designated as an off-leash area. It's used by dozens, hundreds of people a day already for dog walking without the need for costly infrastructure. There has been some talk about using the other end of the northern side, but actually I think that's probably, it's not a great location either. It's not very accessible. There's no parking there. The bridge is further up, and there is not a marked crossing either on Manning Road. I fully support the proposal to look at Riverglade Reserve as a better location for all the reasons that have been said. There are toilets there. There's an accessible playground there. There's parking there. There are plans to develop a cafe. I think it ticks all of the boxes for that. You know, I personally would question the need for this sort of facility. Frankly, having seen a lot of these, talk about native grasses and stuff growing in those locations, I think to me is wishful thinking. Most of them are destitute of grass because lots of dogs run around in there. So really, I would probably say consultation on the need for it. It would be a starting point, but I would really agree with Mark's proposal that perhaps we reconsider the need to go forward on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. If councillors do have any questions?
Yeah, I've got one, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Bagara.
Just a clarification. I've heard two speakers now say there is no, like Gladesville Road is dangerous for crossing, but I'm sure there is a path under Gladesville Road from Tarbin Creek. Is that right?
Yes, there's a path under from Augustine Street, but if you're coming down the hill, there's no crossing there. And you have to cross at Augustine and Gladesville Road, which is blind in two directions, really dangerous place to cross. I hate it.
And one more, I've heard, I think it was the current speaker and probably Mr. O'Grady's talk about coffee near the children's play space. I assume that means they're in favour of that cafe at the Priory.
Different process, but in general, I'm favourable. Often.
Flippant comment.
Thank you, Councillor Quinn.
I'll just mention in response to that question as well, that ramp that goes down and under Gladesville Road Bridge is a non-compliant accessible ramp. So it's too steep for anyone that needs it for, wheelchair purposes and so on.
And it's only accessible if you're already coming down that side of Augustine. It's dangerous from the other side.
Councillors, any other questions to Dan? If not, I will call Mr. Rossdide. Ross, you have 3 minutes.
I won't need that few minutes. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor and the councillors, for letting me speak. Look, the predecessors have actually have covered virtually all the points that I was going to make, except just today I received feedback about just one of the dog parks. This is a more reserved down at Oakley. What it has led to is excessive noise from dogs and owners, rubbish strewn around, social media advertising the area with great gusto and bringing people in from well out of the area, impossible parking problems, nighttime noise, and grass dying. And in fact, what I also understand from a lot of these dog parks with intensive use, the grass always dies and becomes muddy and becomes impossible. Now, in that location, now the users of it are demanding lighting at nighttime. They want to have also lighting now installed for nighttime use. Now, that may be fine if there were no near neighbours. I think it would be bloody great. But we have got residents all around, and night lighting would be absolutely horrible on top of what we're seeing. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ross. Councillors, any questions? Councillor Crassoy.
So just a question to yourself, and I'm assuming every other speaker, that I assume that all of your submissions have been made through the correct process channels as well. Thank you.
Councillors, any other questions? If not, no. Thank you, Ross. I'll now call Mr. Jack Mulvaney.
Apologies, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Jack Mulvaney came home late from school and he's now at home doing his homework.
Okay, all right. Well, that makes sense. I assume you're Peter.
That's correct.
Oh, Peter, you're up now.
Thank you.
In Jack's stead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and councillors and council staff for hearing me tonight. As has been said earlier on, most of what I'm about to say has been heard, but I'll go through it anyway. On the concept of things, yeah, I do agree with a dog park as such, or an enclosed small dog park somewhere, but I think it's clearly in the wrong area that's been proposed. The area that there's inadequate parking in the area. There's a proximity to busy Gladesville Road, which is the main thoroughfare from Hunters Hill up to Gladesville Shops. There is the proximity to residential homes and the noise that will bring from, whether it be from barking dogs, slamming gates, or traffic congestion. We actually have a very small dog ourselves, and we're afraid that if we've got additional dogs in the area in a small dog park there, not only will the dogs across the road be barking, but our dog will also, and similar neighbourhood dogs that join the park. I believe the restriction of access to the park via gates and a fence will impact children who currently use the park. That park means they can no longer ride their bikes down through that, as my son does. He can no longer ride his billy cart with his friends around the neighbourhood down that slope of the hill because it will be fenced off and with dogs running around everywhere. And the other thing they can't do is play chasings in that part of the park or other games that they play. Some of them I don't even know the names, and I'm probably a bit old for that. The chosen area itself is not flat. It's steep sloping and inappropriate for small dogs, which makes it good for billy carts. A restricted fenced off area will ruin the natural aesthetics of the area. Like, it's a beautiful reserve to look at for those actually using the reserve or driving by. I believe a more suitable area would be somewhere either in Riverglades Reserve or possibly even down the horse paddock at Clark's Point. It's been mentioned about the ruining of the grass and what a dog park can do. We've actually travelled up to Monash Park ourselves, and that's not in a good state. We've also been over to the park at, I think it's Blackman Park at the Lane Cove there, and the ground there isn't in a good state. So not very good on a sloping area. The other thing I just want to mention is Riverglades Reserve. It has a children's playground, a proposed cafe. You've got the Priory there, and you've got proposed off-street parking. It would make more sense and more convenience for families going there, one-stop shop. Here we go, we get our coffee, we have the kids play, we walk the dog, and who knows what we can do. We might even have someone playing sport down at the Tarpon Fields down there, and also we can say hello to the turtle at the turtle pond. So, thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Councillors, any questions? If not, I hope Jack aces his homework.
Great, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
That's all the speakers for the Tarpon Creek item, so I'll be moving on to item 3.1, councillors. Again, we have a number of speakers to this matter, just so that all of the members of the gallery and those that are speaking are well informed. Council received a briefing on this matter last week. I will invite the General Manager to update the public here today on what's transpired as part of our DA process for the tree DA, so that as the speakers are giving their address, they are informed and can ask questions if need be. General Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I guess I'd like to begin by saying this, that prior to my arrival at the end of March as General Manager, obviously I'm aware that in the lead up to these DAs pertaining to Fig Tree Park, that there was extensive community consultation. It is always really difficult to make an assessment of the feeling and the sentiment of that feedback when you're not present. You can read as many reports as you possibly can, and you can get relayed back to you what transpired during a community consultation scenario. But I'm sure that everyone will understand and respect, unless you are physically there during that process, it is hard to have the basis of the understanding of that in totality. So I won't go into the history, because I'm sure that people are very much aware of the background here, but in a nutshell, council received a grant from the state government. And can I just say that if there is any issues in regards to that money from the state, that's not really an issue for council, that's a money for the state. They decide who they're going to distribute that money to post an application process. So as the new General Manager, I genuinely and sincerely take feedback from our ratepayers and our constituents very seriously. Now, as a consequence of that, during the DA process for tree removal, there was, in my view, a need to take a deep breath and assess all that feedback. And I think that the two issues that really came out for me was that there is no, in my view, overwhelmingly negativity to providing services for broader ratepayers pertaining to having a playground space and an amenities block. I don't think any modern park in any council in anywhere in Australia should be devoid of an amenities block. I think the issue here is fit for purpose and the size of those two infrastructure pieces. Now, as a consequence of that, I advised the councillors last week that it is my intent to modify that DA, and that is to reduce the size of those two pieces of infrastructure to make them fit for purpose. Now, consequence of that, why I can't reveal the final detail tonight, that the principle of that move is to significantly mitigate tree loss. And that's my intent, and that's what we will do over the next few weeks. I think the other thing that I'd like to also point out too is that in a society of inclusiveness now, it is also really important that we provide a scenario in that park for people, particularly with mobility problems and those in wheelchairs, to have ability to go through that park from one end to the other. And at the moment, that doesn't exist. And I think any person with a fair-minded conscience would understand that that needs to be a component of it. I also would like to point out this. Under the rules of local government, we actually don't need permission to what we would build within that park. So for those two pieces of infrastructure, there is no DA required. So we're trying to do this upfront, transparently, and listen to our community. So I'm not going to be rushing any DA through about that at the local planning panel this month. We will take a back seat and we will review it in good faith. But I still, as a general manager, have a complete focus on delivering that project. Mr. Mayor also would probably give the opportunity to the Acting Director of Planning whether he'd like to add to that. if you'd like to add any more comments to that.
No, I think that, Mr. Mayor, the council's in a position here because they're basically the owners of the park. We have actually three parties that are involved in the development of it. There's council as the owner, then there's the professional staff that assess an application, and then we then present that to the local planning panel. The local planning panel will be the ones who make the decision on that because it is council's land. So that the general manager is acting as an applicant, the same as what you would be with your house. And he has reviewed the application in light of the submissions that have come in, has sought to amend that in line with what would be the normal process. Then we'll receive those as assessment group. We'll then report to the local planning panel, and the assessment of trees is being done by an independent arborist. So we will put that to the local planning panel, and if the local planning panel, any person who has a submission is able to address that particular panel. So that's the process that we'll be actually going through.
Mr. General Manager, anything else to add?
No, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
So that's the process. That's what council was updated on last week. It was not done in time, and I'll be asking Councillor Williams if that satisfies his position, because largely what is being suggested in this notice of motion is being done by the staff, and it is already in train. But I will obviously give anyone who's made an application to speak on this matter the opportunity to address council, but with that in mind, that the substance of this motion is being addressed by the professional staff. That being the case, I will invite Ms. Karen Raisin to address the meeting.
Read out one, Mr. Mayor. So
That's going to be read out.
Any will do any ones that require any submission to be read out.
Yes. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
This is Catherine Raisin. I'd like to offer my support of the motion item number 3.1 Fig Tree Park DA put forward by Councillor Ross Williams and Jim Sanderson. I'm interested in seeking a little clarity and honesty around what's really taking place at Fig Tree Park. As we have witnessed, there are some who clearly do not want so much upgrading or tree removal or money spent on this little park, as was clearly demonstrated with the current affair this past week. Yes, Fig Tree Park could do with an upgrade, but not a complete makeover, starting with a clean slate. All this community resistance has come about because it's incongruent, incompatible, discordant, misaligned to what the people want and originally sought from council. Council may have consulted with the community, yet what you're now attempting to deliver just doesn't add up. How a grant application for $475,000 turned into a lavish $4.75 million on 0.6 of a hectare is a story I'd really love to hear. The DA describes, in quotes, the removal of trees is consistent with the master plan, close quotation marks, yet to be made public or even acknowledged exists. My first question, are these 37 trees perhaps inconveniently located within a grander master plan known only to a few? I hear there's a lack of transparency, a lack of meaningful communication with the public, and a manipulation of process. My next question, is there a reason council has yet to release a draft master plan ? Of greatest concern, however, is the demolition of 48 Gladesville Road. This is a council asset that's got to be worth $2.5 to $3 million if sold. Rather, it's to be demolished to give a slither of land for a formal park entrance that will make the sale of the remainder of the land less profitable or difficult. As someone whose rates will increase dramatically in the future, I have to question council's decision-making on this. I would hate to see the value of this asset, land value alone, lost or absorbed or gifted at some future time to a new proposal that requires an entrance to a commercial or residential development or car park. This would not be acceptable nor meet the pub test. That lost money could help our budget bottom line. Let us see your master plan or future plans for this precinct and your willingness to engage and consult. We care for our community and for the environment. I think the public's level of tolerance with governments of all persuasions, federal, state and local, has shifted in recent times, with preparedness to move on or challenge where issues of integrity are at stake. We seek truthful answers to our questions. We look for open and honest consultation, transparency, engagement, and hopefully reciprocal respect. Thank you, Catherine Raisin.
Thank you, Anne. Just on a couple of matters that have been raised, and I will obviously Ms. Raisin is not here to caution, but a master plan has been adopted by this council, a concept plan for the park. That is a public document. The arborist report that was put on public exhibition is a public document, and it does identify exactly which trees are slated for removal. That is being reviewed, as the General Manager has said. Comments about a grander master plan known to a few, there is none. We are regulated by the Local Government Act, and everything we do is public unless it is commercial in confidence. The matter of the demolition of the cottage, that is not an asset that has ever been slated for or proposed to have been sold. The view of council at the time, if I remember correctly, is that we are increasing the green space of the park by the size of that footprint, and that forms part of the formal part of the park. So I can just say to a couple of those items, I would caution grand assumptions being made, because council obviously has to act with integrity with all of these issues. So suggestions to the contrary will have to be curtailed. So with that in mind, I'll move on to speaker number 8, which I believe is also going to be read out. There's a statement, Mr. James Simpson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Very disappointed with the process. Didn't get any real opportunity to comment once the concept diagrams report was prepared. No project team came to explain the concept in detail. Council staff would not commit, kept saying it's a concept, and didn't know the details nor could answer our questions. Council haven't listened to what people wanted, and that is keep the trees, more seating, small play equipment, and keep the park as untouched as possible. It's a beautiful sanctuary. Mr. James Simpson.
Thank you, Annie. Another speaker to be read out is Miss Colleen Tracy.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. There needs to be more discussion and consultation with citizens of Hunters Hill and proper plans showing exactly what the proposed council plans are for Fig Tree Park. At the Fig Tree Citizens Panel, which I attended on the 13th of November 2021, the outcome was not to remove 37 trees. The consensus was retain 19th century garden-esque style landscaping and the heritage and representation of Hunters Hill to be retained in the design. The design was to include a secure boundary fence and a playground. Flooding issues needed to be considered and addressed. It seems that the Fig Tree Park Citizens Panel recommendation has been completely ignored, and that 4.75 million needs to be used up, but not in a good way. This is a park that is used by many for relaxation, meeting of local residents, Tai Chi. Children play while supervising adults have coffee in the park. Right now, the trees are bare, but when spring comes, it will come alive with a wonderful canopy of greenery. Do the right thing, fix the drainage issue, do not remove the trees, put in a small playground with fencing, more seating and tables, and perhaps a small toilet block. Parking is always at a premium along Ryde Road, Gladesville Road, and surrounding streets. And Fig Tree Park is a local park accessed many by people on foot. And if the money is not entirely used, return the balance to the state government.
Thank you, Annie. I'll invite speaker number 10, and I can see her in the audience, Miss Judith Johnson. Welcome, Judith. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you. And thank you Mr Mayor, for allowing me to speak. Having just heard this recent discussion, then I think a lot of what I wanted to say has already been said. However, I'll just put the specs on. I support Ross Williams and Jim Sanderson regarding the future for Fig Tree Park. Our historic and heritage suburb must retain its character and significance, retain the charm and beauty for all future generations, not just for us. Already we've lost the Jacaranda Festival, which ceased because not enough jacarandas. Today, the trees scheduled for removal from Fig Tree will be yet another irretrievable loss of tree canopy. Hunters Hill councils over many years in the past have made it one of the worst in Sydney on record for loss of canopy. Our suburb has lost hundreds of trees over just the past several years. In other Sydney council, trees are being planted in their hundreds to provide for the climate. We have the reputation of being an historic garden suburb, but how long will that last? I volunteered to speak tonight at the last minute, knowing that I represent many scores of people who are too shy or too private to go public. But these residents are listening, and they do vote, and they do realise how important these decisions are. Meanwhile, we residents must be heard, especially when there is a significant issue which impacts on all of us. We fully understand the significance for Fig Tree of these potential decisions coming up by council. There have been too many recent important issues determined by council, it seems alone, with so-called residents' consultation, which is then largely ignored by council, as I have been told. I thank you all for listening to me.
Thank you, Jim. You could just stay there a moment. Councillors, any questions of Ms Johnson, Mrs Johnson? If not, Julia, is that a hand up or is? No. Thank you, Judith.
Thank you.
I will call Dr. Alastair Sharp, speaker number 11. Alastair, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I speak in support of Councillor Williams' proposal that council review the DA, notwithstanding what we've heard from the General Manager tonight. There are many problems with the proposal as it stands. Apart from the fact that the application was for $475,000, not $4.75 million, which I find quite amusing. It's now obvious that many in the community are unhappy with the piecemeal way that council is telling us about what's proposed for Fig Tree Park. It's all very well for council to have the power to do anything it likes within the park, but that doesn't mean that it should do things without properly divulging what it's proposing. How can one consider a proposal to remove healthy, mature trees without a strong explanation of the reason for removing them? How can one consider a proposal to demolish the cottage at 48 Gladesville Road without understanding the purpose? And you'll note that the plan of management for Fig Tree Park does not include 48 Gladesville Road as part of the park. The concept plan does, but the plan of management does not. So you've got a discrepancy there. Presumably you're going to have to rezone 48 Gladesville Road as park so that to include it. And you certainly need to do that if you're going to use the funding from this grant for anything on 48 Gladesville Road, because that is explicitly directed at land that is park. So we have a sketch, and I don't accept the General Manager's assurance that the concept plan is the draft plan, because it's clearly labelled concept plan. So I consulted my Collins Dictionary, and it defines a concept as an abstract idea. Now, are you really saying that you're going to spend $4.75 million on the basis of an abstract idea? I think not. I know council must have detailed proposals for Fig Tree Park. After all, the guidelines stipulate that the work has to be completed by the end of this year. So before starting to cut down trees, council needs to release more than a concept and to identify exactly what is proposed. Which trees stand in the way of proposed structures and paths? How will the park be drained? Because it's been a quagmire lately, virtually impassable after the heavy rain. It obviously requires major drainage works. And it makes no sense at all to talk about which trees are going where without, first of all, talking about how you're going to drain the land, because you might well find that you have to dig trenches that are going to destroy lots of trees. And the general manager mentioned the need to make it suitable for people in wheelchairs.
Councillors, moving an extension of time. Councillors Williams, Councillor Sanderson, all those in favour? Against? That's carried.
So we need to understand more than just the concept of a wiggly line showing some paths. We need to understand what is actually proposed for the form of paths and also for their surface, the surface that's proposed. And certainly the paths, if you had a path there at the moment, it would have been underwater in recent times. So certainly the topography is going to need to be changed to accommodate drainage and all-weather paths. So until such details are released, it would be premature to proceed with the current DA for tree removal. And yes, so I support Councillor Williams' proposal. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sharp. Councillors, any questions? Councillor Sanders.
Dr. Sharp, you made a comment about the fragmentation of the process. Would it assist with your concern about that fragmentation if after the proposal is considered and that we do have some reduction in scale of the playground, but also the amenities block and that and a bit of moving around to save more of the trees, would it satisfy or improve the situation if that DA before relodgement came back to the elected body of council for a determination whether it should be lodged or not?
Well, I think there has to be more than a concept. There has to be some definite plan for what's proposed before we dig drains, before we cut down trees, before we do anything, because it only makes sense if you know what it is that you're trying to do. I mean, if somebody's doing a new house, you don't decide where the trees are going before you have the drawings for the house. You know, it seems absurd to me.
Councillors, Councillor Krasoy.
Just off the back of one of your comments, Dr. Sharp, I wonder if I could ask a question through you, Mr. Mayor, about a clarification on the timeline for the completion of the project, and also the benefit of the questions that have been raised, an explanation of how a concept plan moves to become a draft plan and where that process is at, because there seems to be a little confusion about that.
Mr. General Manager.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Mayor. Well, first of all, let's deal with the timeline. So council has got formal acceptance for an extension for the delivery of that park until the end of the financial year 22-23. So the deadline for the project is not the end of this year. Council formally applied for an extension of time and that's been granted. I guess in layperson's terms, Deputy Mayor, this is the process we're going through now to transition as part of the renewed or modified DA application is to make sure that that is transitioned from concept plans into detailed plans. That's the work we're going through right now. And just to add to what I said earlier, the substantiveness of that DA was done well before I started here as the general manager. So consequently, that's why I'm now taking the time to review it. And I'm also happy to say on the record that our rollout, if that's the right word, in terms of explaining that concept plan post the concept plan and prior to the lodgement of the original DA wasn't good enough. And consequently, that's why I'm sitting here tonight saying we're reviewing the DA.
Councillors, any other questions?
I have a question.
Oh, Councillor Vergara.
Dr. Sharp, do I understand correctly that you object to the quantum of the grant, the $4.75 million? Do I understand that either from what you've said tonight or your appearance on the current affair program?
No, not at all. I'm not objecting to the amount of money. The guidelines make it clear that we were eligible for that. You know, there's a table there that says that we're eligible for 4.75. I just thought it was extremely sloppy of council to lodge an application for 475,000. I think it's inconceivable that a council.
Dr. Sharp,
would be
I would caution you about using those types of adjectives about council. I could.
Thank you for clarifying that you don't object to the quantum.
Councillor Vergara. These processes are lengthy when you apply for these types of grants, and understand that council, as I understand it, never had an intention of applying for 475,000. That might have been an error in one document that was floating around, but it was always the intention of the council to apply for the 4.75 million. So although you might find it humorous, that is not the case. Councillors, any other questions? Councillor Quinn.
Yes, it's a clarification, I guess, a point that Dr. Sharp made, and through you, Mr. Mayor, perhaps to the General Manager. The issue of 48 Gladesville Road has been raised by a number of the speakers. My understanding is that the reason for the demolition of the cottage, which is not a substantial cottage, as we all know, at 48 Gladesville Road, is to provide clear and open access to Fig Tree Park from Gladesville Road precinct. So at the moment, it's really only accessed openly from Ryde Road side. You can walk through the community centre, but that's not a major thoroughfare. Whereas my understanding of demolishing 48 Gladesville Road and including it in the whole concept is that to give it a much bigger address, if you like, from Gladesville Road. Is that correct?
Mr. General Manager.
Well, firstly, it's really hard. I'm sorry, I'm not being apologetic here, but I wasn't here. So when the decisions were made, my understanding is that was the principle. But let's just apply a couple of factual common sense here. So, Councillor Quinn, I probably can't articulate it any better than that it essentially provides an additional access point and thoroughfare into the park, which in my view is good. I think the other thing too is that it allows greater access and activation of access to the coffee shops, for example, rather than have to walk around on Ryde Road or around the other way. And it does increase the footprint of open and public space. Can I also say that I won't preempt any decision? So just for complete clarity here, we're talking about two very different DAs here. So one DA, which was spoken to predominantly tonight, is around the tree removal. That is one very specific DA. The DA in regards to the demolition of 48 Gladesville Road is a very separate DA that will be considered by the LPP this month. And if not this month, next month, but probably this month. I won't preempt anything in regards to the LPP's decision because that's not my call. But I am happy to say that the heritage report says that there is no heritage value to that property, and from a person who I guess ultimately has the oversight of the facilities management of that property, it is in very poor state, particularly internally. So that's another thing to consider.
Thank you, Mr. General Manager. Councillors, any other questions of Dr. Sharp?
No, Mr. Mayor, am I able to make a comment?
Councillor Vergara.
Just following on from what the General Manager said, neither Councillors Prieston, Councillor Quinn or I were part of the 2021 consultation processes. In March this year, we were presented with essentially the end result of that extensive process. Now, the people best placed to decide whether or not that end result reflected the extensive consultation under the former council led by now Councillor Williams and Councillor Sanderson as Mayor and Deputy Mayor respectively, would have been councillors who were here during 2021. So the same approach that the General Manager wasn't here, neither were Councillors Prieston, Quinn or I. And the motion presented in March 2022 was passed unanimously.
Thank you, councillor. Any other questions of Dr. Sharp? If not, thank you, Dr. Sharp.
Thank you.
I now call Mr. Charles Amos. Welcome, Charles. You have 3 minutes.
My name is Charles Amos, President of the Rotary Club of Hunters Hill. I appreciate the opportunity to speak for 3 minutes, and I hope I'll only be 3 minutes. I wish to support the motion for a review of the plans for Fig Tree Park, not just for retention of the trees, but also for the main feature in the park, the original fountain, now a featured garden bed. The Rotary Club of Hunters Hill is a community-based organisation that is now 65 years old, with a rich history of improving amenities in the local community. The Rotary Club is a major stakeholder in Fig Tree Park, given the club's past involvements. Building the fountain, now a flower bed, which was built by members of the community almost 50 years ago. And I'll hold up a picture of this particular item I'm talking about. It's the good-looking thing right in the middle of the park. So that was built 50 years ago. We made 2 submissions to council for this process. And firstly, we proposed keeping the original fountain, now a flower bed, or incorporating a new fountain in the park, given the amount of funds involved. From the new proposed plans released for the upgrade, the original fountain, call it garden, appears to have disappeared. It's the one thing that's been the focal point in the park for the marketing of the whole program. One of the few things that remains an attractive feature in the park. Its featured photo was on every piece of marketing material for every request from the community, asking for their feedback. But alas, it now cannot be found on the latest plans for the park. It appears that whatever history there is in the park is to be removed and forgotten. In Hunters Hill, we love our history, but these days, history is removed and destroyed. I'm sure given the amount of money received to upgrade the park, it will cost a little to remove the original fountain, but had there not been so many funds, it may well have been retained. There is no recognition of the Rotary Club on that build and the original fountain made 50 years ago. Perhaps the large feature piece of stone in the fountain can be retained and perhaps relocated, if possible. The club would very much appreciate recognition for the role played in the past history of the park. And in our second submission, we also asked for a welcoming pergola, in essence, on that spot where 48 Gladesville Road is. In other words, an entrance to Fig Tree Park from Gladesville Road. Alas, that also appears to have been disregarded.
Sorry. Extension, move Councillor Williams, second to Councillor Quinn. All those in favour? Against? Carried.
Just to finish, sorry, we support proposal 3.1, but also a review of a number of other things that may well have been missed, and to be rethought on plans for the park before the bulldozers and the chainsaws are called in. Thank you.
Mr. Amos, question, Councillor Quinn.
So that's intriguing, that information you've just given us. So were those submissions put in last year? Were they?
That was in my full submission.
Last year?
Yes.
Yeah, right.
Also stating the other things that we've done in the community, building the Scout Hall when it was burnt down. And well, we started another program in Hunters Hill that was for the recognition of improving the community. And there's a litany of things over the last 65 years that we've been involved in, but we are passionate about this particular item. It seems to be been completely overlooked, this whole process.
Charles, I have a question. Was there ever a plaque on that item, or is that something that there wasn't?
The only plaque was placed on the hall, 44 Gladesville Road, to say that the first Probus Club in Australia was held in that hall by Rotary.
Hmm.
And now there are thousands of Probus clubs throughout the whole of the world, well, whole of Australia anyway. But our Rotary Club was credited, was the founding Rotary in Australia in that hall.
Councillors, any other questions? If not, thank you, Charles. Now call Mr. David Salter.
Thank you, Mayor, and I thank the council for this opportunity. What a splendid mess the Fig Tree Park proposal has become. From the start, the grant application was full of pie-in-the-sky fantasies, faulty figures and misleading statements. It claimed as its whole justification that the park was underused and should be activated. Yet when council actually measured the usage, it found Fig Tree Park to be the third most used public space in Hunters Hill. It envisaged buying the house at number 2 Ryde Road. There was 2.25 million in the budget for that specific purpose, almost half the total grant. But acquisition of that kind are expressly excluded from the program. It assumed the resumption of the croquet club land. Again, that's not going to happen. Yet council's proposal assured us the total green space of the park would be increased by at least 10% after the development. But more concerning still is what isn't in the proposal. There is no acknowledgement of the inevitable increase in traffic and parking problems, or of the significant extra maintenance cost for council. And most damning of all, the application didn't reveal that the scheme would involve culling 37 trees from the park. As sins of omission go, that is surely a whopper. Thousands of dollars have already been spent on consultants, designs, surveys, and online presentations. But despite all that expenditure, the community remains unconvinced. And let's be clear, we're not fanatical NIMBYs or heritage purists. None of us are opposed to some improvements in Fig Tree Park. In fact, many are long overdue. That's because the park has been neglected by this council. For years, nothing has been done with its serious drainage issues. For years, we've suggested that there should be safety fences to stop kids chasing balls onto the road. There could be some more picnic-style seating, proper rubbish bins, and a modest ablution block. Those would all be sensible, practical improvements in proportion to the park's small area. Now, after sustained community opposition, it seems there's to be a token reduction in the number of trees removed and an unspecified rescaling of the proposed ablution block and play area. If true, that's a start. This is not about factions or individuals on council. To us, you are a single entity. We have no interest in blame games. That's cheap politics and pointless. You are here to represent the residents and ratepayers. And surely it's clear by now that we don't want this overdevelopment in Fig Tree Park. We urge the council to withdraw its current DA, engage in genuine consultation with the community, and rethink the whole scheme. Thank you.
Any questions of Mr. Salter?
Thank you.
No. Thank you, Mr. Salter. I now call our last speaker, Mr. Mark Bennett. Welcome back, Mark. He must miss us.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, councillors, staff and General Manager. Not all improvements are good. However, not all improvements are bad for a municipality. I'm in favour of improving this facility within reason. From the discussions I've had in the last week, it seems that the available funds may be driving the scale of the works. I've been told by people in the last few weeks that they are very concerned about the loss of mature trees. We should place a high value on mature trees and plant additional trees as well. The benefits are many. The funds granted in this instance are quite significant. However, Fig Tree Park is not a large park. I'd like you all to consider a more modest development of Fig Tree Park. This would be welcomed by many in the community, particularly those residents whose properties face onto Fig Tree Park. We would also honour your councillors' commitments to preserve the green heritage of Hunters Hill. please consider reducing the scale of these works. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillors, any questions of Mr. Bennett? If not, thank you. Councillors, we have a motion moved by Councillor Williams and seconded by Councillor Sanderson. As I said, we didn't have opportunity, or specifically Councillor Williams didn't have opportunity before the business papers were printed for us to have our briefing in which the substantial components of this matter have been dealt with by the General Manager and are being processed by the professional staff, and we've heard it here at a public meeting tonight. Councillor Williams, what is your intention with this motion? Do you intend to withdraw or move forward?
Mr. Mayor, I intend to move the motion, and I'll formally move the motion.
Moved, Councillor Williams, seconded. Councillor Sanderson. Councillor Williams.
Before we do that, I believe Councillor Sanderson has an amendment, which I'm quite happy to accept.
What I would like to do is.
Councillor Sanderson, was this sent through or?
No.
No.
It was only prepared at 5 o'clock. What I would like to do is for the motion to be numbered, so that the part that exists at the present point is numbered 2, or sorry, it's numbered 1. Then it's sent on to 2, that a revised EA be brought back to a meeting of council for endorsement prior to lodgement for re-lodgement for determination. That is what I discussed with Councillor Williams earlier. I believe hearing the discussion tonight, I think we should probably add a third point to it, and I ask Councillor Williams if he might consider this. And I just scrawled it out while people have been addressing council tonight. Point 3, that means of retention of a fountain and other issues raised this evening be considered as part of the review process.
Can I suggest that raised at meeting 4510 for clarity?
Happy to accept that, Mr. Mayor.
Moved and seconded. Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, for the opportunity to address council in relation to this motion. You quite rightly point out that the motion was put forward prior to the council briefing. I find the council briefings a problem because they're done in confidence, and the community is unaware of what takes place in those briefings, nor the decisions made in the briefings. So I think this motion is very important in putting on the table for the community a reflection and a understanding of the concerns that are being raised. We've heard tonight many of the attributes of this reserve, this park. It's fit for purpose for relaxation and reflection. It has the intrinsic values of Hunters Hill in terms of it being a garden park. And I think that did come out very strongly in the community citizen forum or whatever it was, that the 3 options, the 2 options, there needed to be a third, which is to respect the park as a garden park. We're here tonight doing this because consultation has to be meaningful. And the fact that we've got so many residents here tonight, which represent, I'm sure, a bigger body of people that aren't convinced by where council is going with this DA. To me, it's a bit back to front. We're talking about reducing the scale of infrastructure, toilets and playground to accommodate more trees. I would have thought the better way of looking at it is let's retain the trees and then you fit these auxiliary things within the park. To me, the sort of scale of these facilities even though council is not obliged by its process or law, would require council to put these proposals to the community. It's not, it's just going ahead with the scale and whatever, which now has been reflected in what the general manager is saying. They'll be reviewed. But to me, they're just as important as this issue about trees. The community should have a say in the scale and size and siting of these elements. And even though council isn't required, it should do it through a DA process. So to me, it's very important that council manage its funds responsibly, their community funds, and that needs to be reflected in council's business. We need to spend to a purpose, not to a budget. We've heard that here tonight. Council needs to be a model applicant. It needs to give the community the respect and opportunity, as the general manager is proposing, to revisit the DA as anybody else would as an owner of a DA. So to me, we need to listen to the community concerns. We need to ensure as we go forward that consultation is meaningful and that we get an outcome which preserves the unique attributes of this reserve for the community, so that everybody can enjoy it. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Thanks, Quinn.
Mr. Mayor, just a point of clarification, if I may, to Councillor Williams and Sanderson. So number 2, the revised DA. So we're talking about the tree DA. Is that what you're referring to there?
That's the only outstanding.
Yes, because the other DA is the 48 Blaisdell Road DA.
Yeah, we're talking about
the tree DA. Thanks. Thank you.
Councillors, there's been a speaker for. Any speaker against the motion?
Thank you.
For the motion? Right. Oh,
I'm happy to speak for the motion, Mr. Mayor. I think everything that's put down in those 3 things actually covers the intent anyway of what we've already heard tonight, summarised by the General Manager, except for number 3. Now, number 3, after Mr. Amos spoke, and the issue of the fountain and so on, that was news to me. And so clearly that hasn't come through from the consultation last year. So I do think that is worth including in the DA, that those significant pieces of history of our municipality continue to be written.
thank you, Councillor. A question that I have just vis-a-vis point 2, if the revised DA is brought back to a council meeting essentially for endorsement, is that something that's going to meet the timelines of the project, or will that require more another attempt at a extension?
Do you want to talk to that first?
I don't think it will. In regards to the, sorry, through you, Mr. Mayor, that the you've got to work back with those timelines. As far as the process is concerned, as I outlined beforehand, I had been working on the basis that there would be some revised plans shortly that would go back on exhibition, and then we would receive the submission to that, and we would probably be looking at the report to the local planning panel possibly in October, and then the planning panel does that, and then that becomes very, very short with the timelines. So we have to work out whether or not we could fit that aspect in.
If I may, Mr. Mayor, the other thing to consider here too is that if we get through that stage, that as per the Local Government Act, we have to go through a very thorough procurement process to award those works.
Thank you, Mr. General Manager. Councillor Sanderson.
I have a question. If the matter of the DA would be brought back to the extraordinary meeting of council, does that improve the situation?
We may have to. This is the short answer to that. Councillors, Councillor Crassoy.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I just wonder, Councillor Williams, whether you would consider adding a little word in light of the fact that that the General Manager had advised us that it was his opinion to review the DA. I wonder if we could, in point 1, say that Council support the General Manager's review of the Big Tree Park DA.
Councillor Williams.
No, I don't accept that. That's not the intent of the motion.
I can get a seconder for it. I'd like to put it as an amendment.
That's amendment moved by Councillor Crassoy. Is it seconded? Seconded, Councillor Vergara. Councillor Crassoy.
Briefly, if I may. I appreciate at the briefing last week that the General Manager's frankness, as I have appreciated since he joined us on council, inheriting a lot of projects that are on the boil coming over from the last term of council, with some senior staff gone and with our previous General Managers gone, and with a new council. With COVID, having COVID himself, almost all the councillors running through it in the last 6 months and a lot of the senior staff. He turned his mind to the Fig Tree Park project from the start and has been gradually getting his head around it. One of the questions I asked the General Manager at the briefing last week, when he advised us that he would be planning to review the DA for the number of trees, wasn't to reduce the number of trees by reducing the size of the facilities. It was his considered professional opinion, correct me if I'm wrong, General Manager, with the new director, when they visited the park and looked at the plans in scale, it was his considered professional opinion that both of those items didn't need to be so big. And that is why the review of the tree DA will be worth doing, because the structures that we don't need a DA for, in our professional senior staff's opinion, can be smaller. Now, in the previous term of council, we were under the advice from the designs that we were given by Scott Carver and by the directors at the time, that the sizes of those two facilities were essential for universal design compliance for the playground and for access and design compliance for the facilities, for the bathroom facilities. So we made our decision based on the expert advice that we had at the time. And within that large park, we felt at the time that in a contemporary park that was going to open into the village, that it could be a beautiful thing. The removal of number 48, which isn't on the agenda for discussion tonight, but the removal of number 48 was to connect that park to the village in a much more flowing way and to create more green open space. And so with that in mind, we kind of felt, well, you know, I'm not an architect, but you rely on expert advice. So with that in mind, we thought that playground, the way it's designed, it's going to have lots of trees in there. It's going to be not like a plastic playground, just in a fence. It would be part of the park. That's how we see it in the design concept. So I really appreciated when I asked the General Manager the other night, last Monday night, are you doing this to remove, to limit the number of trees being taken out, or are you doing it to reduce the size of the facilities? First and foremost, it's to reduce the size of the facilities and make them fit for purpose, as you just raised, Councillor Williams. You designed to purpose. So I appreciate the frankness with that, General Manager, and I appreciate that as a result, it looks like a significant amount of trees, and I might add shrubs, will be saved, because when we say 37 trees, the arborist report calls them trees, but shrubs are called trees as well. So many of the items to be removed are actually shrubs. Some are recommended by the arborist to be, I'm sure you've all read the arborist report because you've all come here to speak tonight, so you'd be informed. But some of the shrubs and small trees are actually impeding the growth of some of the beautiful larger trees. And if you take them out from underneath, the canopy will then be able to increase. And in the design for the park, of course, there would be more tree planting. And that's the part that someone who spoke said, we want this for future generations. You have to plant significant sized trees and they have to have the space to be able to grow if my great-grandchildren are also going to enjoy a park with lovely big trees. So in the design, you have to allow for the fact that you are going to plant big trees that need space to grow as well. So I'm happy with some of the recommendations in the arborist report. I was disappointed to read some of them, and I'm really glad that the General Manager advised us as a council that he intended to review it. As a result, I didn't feel this notice of motion was necessary tonight because we'd sought the General Manager's assurance on the report information he brought us last week, and I believe this has actually already been done, except for the part about the consideration of the fountain area. And I think it's a lovely idea to in some way retain that historical element, if it's not that actual thing, but a nod to that part of our history and keep it incorporated into the design. So it's lovely feedback, and thank you for bringing it tonight. As a council, we didn't get to read every single one of those submissions, but I'm glad you spoke to it, Charles. And so that's why I'm going to support this motion, because I actually didn't think it was necessary until that point, because I have full faith that the General Manager has heard you and has heard us. He's assessed the project that he inherited, and he's given us his strong advice. So that's why I'm proposing this amendment, because I think it's an acknowledgement on paper that the General Manager had already seen this, heard it, and advised us. And I would really like to see that acknowledgement in the notice of motion.
Thank you, councillor. Any speakers against the amendment?
Mr Mayor, given
Councillor
that
Williams.
item 2 is now in the motion, I'm quite happy to accept that addition in item 1.
It's been accepted. Is the seconder happy to accept that? That becomes the motion. Councillors, any other
So
speakers?
just to be really clear.
Councillor Quinn.
Again, to the General Manager and the Director. So if we do, we're adding that extra layer of a DA, a council approved DA, endorsed DA. Are you reasonably confident then, if we were to do it if we had to an extraordinary meeting, that would allay any concerns you might have about not meeting the timeline?
I think it's going to depend through you, Mr Mayor, on when we get the information and when council can make that decision.
Yeah.
A question I have is my understanding is that it's an amendment to the submitted DA, not a fresh DA, obviously.
Yes, that's correct.
Yes.
Could I just
Yes,
speak
General
to that, Mr Mayor? So just firstly to Deputy Mayor Councillor Crassoy's comment. So just two things. One, we've actually engaged a highly skilled professional project manager, external from council, to oversee this project. And to add to what Councillor Crassoy said, that person early on had remarked to me that it was his view that the infrastructure elements of this were too large. And secondly, which has been said on numerous occasions, and this absolutely correct, is that the final components of the application, but more importantly, the plans need to incorporate significant drainage. That's a given for me. But I just would like, Mr Mayor, I think this is very important that we get clarity here. So it's not our intention as the applicant thus far to re-lodge the application. It is to modify the current application.
Thank you, Mr General Manager. Councillor Quinn, did you have another question?
No, so I understand that response then, but so we're actually adding a layer by saying it's got to come back to the council for endorsement.
Well,
that's where the possible risk of timing is.
Well, through you,
Clear
Mr Mayor, rightly or wrongly, Councillor Quinn, it would be my interpretation, my professional interpretation of point 2 at the moment, rightly or wrongly, is that what you're asking here for is to essentially seek formal permission for the modification. But I would suggest that re-lodgement from a technical point of view, and I'm happy to take the considered opinion of the acting director, re-lodgement in my view, and I just want to stress it's my view, says that you're actually withdrawing the current application, putting in a new application. That's not the intent.
So that's where I agree with that. So I'm just so that we're very clear about that, because this timeline is going to get very tight. Yes. So we're saying it's an amended DA being brought back to council.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, Councillor Quinn, that would be my view, yes, but I think respectfully, the absolute expert here is sitting there, and I'm sure that because he runs the planning department, and I'm sure and a person of great respect and experience.
Because what I'm not wanting to do is tie us up in something that's probably not our intent either, in terms of a process. My understanding from what Councillor Williams and Sanderson are saying is they want to come back to this body to say it can go ahead to the local planning panel. That's my understanding of the intent. And I just want to make sure that there's no words there that are going to muck that up.
So the acting director, does relodgement create that issue?
I think it could, Mr. Mayor. I think probably for clarity, if we didn't use the word lodgement, because we are talking about an amendment. And I think lots of people may interpret lodgement, as the general manager has said then, as being withdrawal of the application, starting again and putting in a new one. And that's certainly not the intention, as I understand it from the outset. So
I would suggest perhaps Councillor Williams, you might, if the intent of what Councillor Quinn is suggesting, that we might delete anything after endorsement.
Yeah. Or get rid of the read.
Well, Mr. Mayor, meeting procedure seems to have gone out the window tonight.
I'm just trying to make a suggestion to you, given the intent and the information that we are giving Councillor Williams, to get the expert advice of our general manager and acting director, so that we can move forward with a unified position.
Mr. Mayor, the intent of the motion is clear, that the matter be withdrawn and relodged based on it coming back to this council. It is not good enough, considering the concerns in the community, to say, trust us, we'll get it right for you. We've made mistakes on many levels during this process, and I don't want to make the same mistake again. I want to see that what council staff are recommending is put clearly to the community through the DA process, and that we go and make a decision, a considered decision by council on that information. So
thank you, Councillor. So you would prefer that the intent of your motion is to withdraw the DA and resubmit?
Yes.
Councillor.
Mr. Mayor, I'm going to foreshadow a change to clause number 2, that it read that the revised DA be brought back to a meeting of council for endorsement prior to lodgement for determination, not re-lodgement.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillors, do we have any speakers for the motion? Against the motion?
Sorry.
Councillor Quinn.
Sorry, I'm just, which motion are we?
We are the motion,
the
relodgement motion that was put forward by Councillor Williams. Councillor Quinn.
So given what I just said, clearly I can't, and what we heard from the officers, I'm greatly concerned about the risk that we're going to run out of time if it's got to go through a whole relodgement, a whole new DA process. I can't see any issue, and indeed this happens all the time with development applications, where there are amendments to development applications during the process. And I can't see why council can't itself do an amendment of an application during the process. So for us to stop and reject the first DA and have to do a whole new D1, a new DA, I think is going to just suck up so much time and risk that this whole project will not happen. And hence, I can't accept having the re-lodgement piece in that number 2 clause.
Thank you, Councillor Quinn. Any speakers for the motion? Against the motion? Councillor Williams, right of reply.
Mr. Mayor, I'm confused because what Councillor Quinn was moving is an amendment to the motion.
No, he foreshadowed a motion, which means that it will be dealt with if this motion fails.
Oh,
I'm happy to move it as an amendment. if we want to vote on it beforehand.
Councillor Quinn, I'm in your hands. You have to,
Okay, I'll move an amendment that we get rid of the read.
that is so moved. Is there a second to councillor Crassoy? That
I'll accept that, Mr Mayor.
you'll accept the lodgement component?
Yes, that's right.
Thank you, councillor Williams. Councillor Sanderson, have you got a question?
Well, I wondered whether I can speak to, we've gone through an amendment process.
You almost missed your chance there, but yes, you can speak. You're speaking in favour of the motion, I assume.
Absolutely, Mr Mayor. Look, I went to some trouble over the last few days to just make notes about this whole process. One of the things I point out is that, there was a consultation process, and the motions or the recommendations, and there are only two of them came to the former council, both were about consultation. And the main consultation process actually occurred while council had gone into caretaker mode. So there was a gap there when a lot of other things happened. The substantive motion that started the process was that really got the process going was that in March of this year. And it was I don't think it was a particularly well drafted motion, but the motion that was put to council at that point in time was to say that I'll find it. Do you have any notes as usual? Yeah, that particular motion was that the council endorsed the concept plan for Fig Tree Park as presented by Scott Carbon and endorsed the next steps of the report. When you look into the report, the next steps did include a DA for the demolition of the cottage, but there's no DA for the trees. So the tree DA has never been endorsed by the elected body of council. That's why I moved amendment 2. I think it's important that does occur. I think the other amendment that I put in relation to the fountain, I think is very important, given the historical significance and good work of Rotary in that area. And I thank Mr Amos for bringing that matter up. But I think at least we've got to a point where we're in good agreement on what is a very sound proposal, and I look forward to being brought back to council and seeing modifications, which I hope will address many of the concerns that have been raised tonight.
Thank you, councillor. Any speakers against the motion?
Question,
Mr.
to Mr Young, through you, Mr Mayor. I just want to clarify. So point 2 in the amended motion, which is now just bringing back the amended DA to council, to a meeting of council for endorsement price lodgement.
Yes.
Is the time frame jeopardised by that step?
Yes, it is. Because it does add an additional step into the process, and it will probably delay it by a couple of weeks, depending on when we can get the information.
Councillor Vergara, if it assists, I think that this, if this motion was to be carried, and there was the chance that the timeline was going to blow out, council would probably look to convene an extraordinary meeting to deal with this item in isolation.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. That's very helpful.
Councillors, any other speakers against? For? Councillor Williams, right to reply.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. It does concern me that we're talking about a decision based on a timeline rather than on a need and an outcome. The timeline is there for the process that we're going through. If to make sure that the need is right, we need to adjust that timeline, then I suggest we do. We've already got extension on grants in the past, so if we need extra time to make sure the community is on board, that we do have some meaningful conversations with the community and allow them to have feedback, which is what is being proposed by council having an opportunity to view the amendments or the proposed changes. It's very important that we get it right. To me, a timeline is not an issue here. It's about making sure the community and council are aligned in where we're going with this. The moment we're not, this is an opportunity for us to do that. There's many aspects that have been mentioned about this proposal, about the overall concept and proposal, which are still unconnected. They're issues that are separate. They're not integrated into the thinking of the proposal, nor of the mindset of the community. So to me, it's important we get it right. So be it if the timeline blows out. It's important we get it right. It's important that the community have a say in what these changes are, because to me, saving those trees is the important part. The rest of the infrastructure should sort itself out around the trees at an appropriate scale. So I commend to council this motion so that we can move forward together with the community and make sure that everybody understands where this matter is heading.
Thank you, councillor. Councillors, councillor Quinn, have you got a question?
Just to be clear, so we're voting on. now
The
what's at the
second,
bottom.
yes, the bottom of the screen. Councillors, all those in favour? Against? That is carried. We now move on to item.
Mr Mayor,
Councillor Craswell.
I just wonder whether you would consider moving items 4.10, 4.11 and 4.12 forward, so that the staff that are staying back
Yes.
deal with those matters.
So moved, seconded, councillor Quinn. All those in favour? Against? That is councillor Williams. For or against that?
Well, I'm not sure what items we're talking about.
Items 4.10, 4.11 and 4.12.
Bring it forward.
Bring it forward for the staff that are in the room, yes. So that's unanimous. Item 4.10, draft procedures for the administration of the Model Code of Conduct Policy. Councillors, there is a motion before you. It is page 123. Moved councillor Quinn, seconded councillor, I got councillor Prieston, I think, shot hand up there. Any discussion, councillor Quinn? No. Any other discussion, councillors? If not, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Against? That is carried. Item 4.11, child protection policy. Have I got a mover? Moved councillor Crassoy, seconded councillor Sanderson. Councillor Crassoy. No. Any speakers for or against? No. If not, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Against? That is carried unanimously. Item 4.12, plans of management for Henley Precinct Open Space and Crown Reserves Park and Natural Areas. Moved councillor Sanderson.
I'd like to move to separate the two motions, deal with them separately.
Noting councillors, if we have any burning questions, Susan is here to fix all of our problems.
I'd just like to move a procedural motion, that is that adoption of plans of management for Henley Precinct Open Space and Crown Reserves and parks and natural areas be dealt with by two separate motions.
It's moved, seconded councillor Williams. Is there any discussion to that effect?
I'll just ask.
Councillor Crassoy.
Sorry.
Questions?
No, I'll accept the separation, then I'll ask my questions.
Okay.
Yeah.
Councillors, any questions? If not, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Against? That is carried. That now forms two motions. Let's call it 4.12A, which will be the management for Henley Precinct Open Space. Councillors, do we have a move to the motion? Councillor Quinn, seconded. Councillor Prieston. Councillor Quinn.
Mr Mayor, I think the documentation is all clear here. I commend the council's consultant officer who's assisted in preparing this extensive documentation. I'm aware we've already had a look at this. We've made some internal, some changes to it as a result of conversations that councillors have had in a workshop. And I think we're now at the point ready to move forward to endorse this.
Thank you, councillor. Any speakers against the motion? Councillor Sanderson.
Oh, I believe we're talking about the Hindu.
Yes.
At the present time. Yeah, look, I'd like to comment further on this. Soon after receiving all the submissions on this plan of management, I went through them quite carefully and I made about 9 pages of notes of things that I would recommend as changes. There was both notes and corrections in what I submitted, and I'm grateful that there were some errors in terms of reference to different pieces of legislation. Those errors have either been deleted or amended to be rectified. There are also quite a number of issues that arose, and one of my concerns was because there were a lot of people in Henry itself who were really concerned about the prospect of having 30-year leases. I made a suggestion that they should be, at absolute maximum 25, I would have preferred less. And I suggested that as an amendment. I know that what has occurred is that there has been a problem, or at least there's been a hold up in terms of the process. Ironically, if those suggestions I suggested had been taken up, I think there's a strong chance that we wouldn't have had that delay. So we could have had I think, a better plan of management. I still have great concerns about this plan of management in terms of not just the fact that I think Councillor Williams and I were very strong on strongly of the view that it should have contained a prohibition of artificial turf with the exception of cricket nets. If you'd taken the time to do that, and we had caught the other amendment and done the review and fought the issues with the value of leases, we still could be in the same situation with a better plan of management. Unfortunately, that's not going to happen. But I think my concerns with this plan of management is such that I cannot support its adoption.
Thank you, councillor. Any speakers?
So
Councillor
just
Quinn.
a question, Mr Mayor, if I may, to the consultant. I notice in the document it references the prior census, not the most recent census. Wondering, is it worth us making, now that we have the census data that's come through only months ago, whether it's worth us just adding that data into this plan of management now rather than leaving it with the.
I'll invite Susan to respond. Maybe via the general manager.
But I'm happy for. I think, yeah, Mr. Mayor, I'm sure Susan, but it has to go all the way back.
Does it? Okay.
Councillors, any other speakers against the motion? For the motion? If not, right of reply? No. All those in favour? Against? That is carried. Move to item 4.12B, the council adoption of the management for Crown Reserves, Park and Natural Areas. Councillor Sanderson. Moved. Councillor Sanderson seconded. Councillor Crassoy. Any discussion? Councillor Crassoy.
I just had a question through you, Mr. Mayor. Is this where Tarbone Creek falls into that catch as far as Crown land goes, or it doesn't fall into that?
I'll pass you through to Susan for that.
Tarbone Creek is devolved Crown land, so it's fallen in through the gaps, if you like, in the Local Government Act and plans of management. So it isn't there. There's no legislative way of having a plan of management for Tarbone Creek as it is now. Crown lands, I guess, if you raise that, they say that council can apply to become a Crown land manager, and if council decides to do that, then Tarbone Creek will need a plan of management, and it can be an amendment to that one for Crown Reserves. So it can add there rather than a whole new standalone plan of management.
Well,
it was just a curiosity. Thank you.
Further question to that is then, can we sting Crown lands for the management, for the maintenance fees for it?
No, where it's devolved for council to manage.
Oh, okay. All right. fair enough. Councillor Quinn.
I was intrigued on page 267, the one about homeless people. I was just intrigued to know if we actually had any data on that.
It was from observation. No, it was observation. Yeah.
Yes, yes.
Thank you. Councillors, any other questions or comments? If not, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Against? That is unanimous. Now move back to item 4.1, lease renewal to Total Resurfacing Proprietary Limited. On page 6. Moved, Councillor Quinn, seconded, Councillor Williams. Any discussion? If not, all those in favour? Against? That is carried unanimously. Move to item 4.2, summary of council investments as at 31 July 2022. Move Councillor Quinn, Councillor Williams, seconded Councillor Quinn. Any discussion? If not, all those in favour? Against? That is unanimous. Item 4.3, investment strategy, policy and portfolio review for year ending 30 June 2022. Councillor Williams, seconded, Councillor Crassoy. All those in any discussion?
Just to say,
Councillor Crassoy.
I won't even stand up. It's a really good report, and it was such a pleasure for a non-financial, non-number head to read it. I have questions to discuss, but it's not necessarily the council meeting.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Quinn, you
I
can
just
shut up as
had
well.
a question about what's our timing for, sorry, we're on 4.3, aren't we?
We are on
So
4.
far,
Yep,
so I'm
yes.
How often do we go to tender or revise the advisory services?
Mr. General Manager or Maria, Director of Finance.
So the cost is approximately 11K per year.
Yeah.
And that includes the advisory service plus some assistance with the monthly reporting. So our quotation threshold is 2 quotes from 5,000 to 50,000. So on that basis, you'd sort of do it every 2 or 3 years.
Yeah.
And we did it fairly recently.
That's all I want.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Quinn. Any other discussion? If not, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Against? That is unanimous. So I move on to item 4.4. Development applications determined by local planning panel in July 2022. Got a mover, Councillor Williams, seconded, Councillor Sanderson, or Councillor, any discussion? If not, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Against? That is carried unanimously. Item 4.5, development applications determined by the DCU in July 2022. We've got a mover. Councillor Sanderson, moved, seconded, Councillor Quinn. Any discussion? If not, all those in favour? Against? That is carried. Item 4.6, Councillor Sanderson's leaving the room. We've got a mover, Councillor Quinn, seconded, Councillor Williams. Any discussion? If not, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Against? That's carried. Councillor Sanderson, you can return to the room.
Didn't even get to shut the door.
Didn't even get the door didn't slam behind you. Councillors, I'm just going to check in items 4.7 through to the late item. Is there anything that can't be dealt with in a block? Are there any items that wanted to be raised specifically?
I'd like to speak to item 4.7.
4.7. Well, that works. Any other items, councillors? We will do 4.7, but if these can be moved as a block, I can have someone so move. But
Which ones do you want to block?
so 4.7 is going to be spoken to, so that will be dealt with next. Items 4.8, 4.9, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27 would be dealt with as a block, and then we would deal with the late item after that. So if we're happy with that.
Yeah, most of them are the draft terms.
Yes, they're all.
There's no issues.
Yes.
Yeah.
No. So I'll move to item 4.7 first. The report on status of the LEP and DCP review. Moved. Councillor Sanderson, seconded. Councillor Quinn. Councillor Sanderson.
Yes, look, I'd just like to thank our acting director for the briefing we had the other night. I've had quite valuable. I think with that water, I'd like to keep the input in. I mean, things I raised, I've possibly raised more than anyone else, but there are other things that come to mind as we go through it. I think it's very important that council will remain part of this process. So I thank the director.
Thank you, councillor Sanderson. Any other speakers for or against? If not, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Against? That is unanimous. I will now put items 4.8, 9, and then 13 through to 27. Moved councillor Williams, seconded councillor Crassoy. Any speakers for or against? If not, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Against? That is carried unanimously. I now move to.
Sorry, Mr. Mayor, just if I may, I noticed the minutes for the Movement and Transport Advisory Committee meetings. There have been 2 meetings since these went in. I think it was the one we discussed that we were trying to find the minutes of. So I assume that'll come up at the next meeting.
Yes, councillor.
Because that's actually the meeting where we endorse the terms of reference.
Clause.
As referred to by the officer. Thanks.
Thank you, councillor Quinn. I now move to item 4.28, the Local Government New South Wales Annual Conference motion. Have I got a move? I moved councillor Sanderson, seconded councillor Crassoy. Councillor Sanderson.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, can I move it just with a small amendment, which I've drafted somewhere or other? Probably myself. Just a very slight change in the complaint itself.
Thank you, councillor. That is with that small amendment being erosion or wash.
Yes. That will appear soon. Look at the motion.
Would you like to speak to your motion?
Uh,
I think that it's being done right now, or wash.
Yeah. Look, just a very minor thing. I did look at Quarry Dictionary for wash as someone who's done a little bit of naval architecture in my early years at university. I think wash would be more appropriate and like erosion. And I've changed the word and for, because clearly once you get up to the seawall high school, ferries can't travel up too far, so there won't be ferry down the sea. So it could be any combination of those factors or just one.
Thank you, councillor. Any other speakers for or against? If not, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Against? That is carried. I now move to council and committee of the whole. Councillors, have I got a motion to move into council committee of the whole? Councillor Quinn, seconded councillor Crassoy.
Mr. Mayor, yes, I'd like to speak against that.
Against moving into council committee of the whole? Yes, councillor Williams.
I find it, wherever it is, I can see provision of principal asphalt services as being something that has confidential information in it. But certainly my motion doesn't. It's a request for a review or performance review. It doesn't mention anything about finances or contractual arrangements. So I'm not quite sure how that fits into that category. And likewise, the Buffalo Creek Reserve AFL thing, to me, that is something that should be in the public domain, because we've just been through endless processes with multiple grants where the community is the last people to know what council is doing. So to me, both 8.1 and 8.2 should be an open council, and I accept 8.3 should be in closed council.
Thank you, councillor. General Manager, would you like to make comment about the commerciality of some of these items that would deem them necessary to go into council committee of the whole?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. So under the Local Government Act, section 10.A and B, so it's my view, Mr. Mayor and councillors, that in pertaining to, I'll speak to both. So pertaining to the depot, we have commercial contracts pertaining to that depot. It's as simple as that. And if we're being asked to execute under a notice of motion a review of that depot, it would be my professional view that regardless of how it's worded, the contract that we have in place, which is well and truly above the threshold, is part of that review, whether it's explicitly written or not. Secondly, in regards to the AFL submission, the submission is a large commercial in confidence submission, which has not in fact been submitted. So if that is spoken in open council, then every other person who, or entity, or sporting group or sporting organisation who is willing to submit an application, then all of the details of that submission are now public before the submissions are even being submitted. So consequently, on the basis of the commercial grounds and the commercial position of the people who want to approach council about this matter, it's my view, as I portrayed to the mayor when setting the agenda, that it should be in the committee of the whole. And I won't say any more than that because we're still in public session.
Councillors, any other speakers for or against? If not, I'll I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Against? That is carried. We will move into closed session. If we could stop the live recording, we will return in a moment.
Can we just